Oh man, man. Hey, I love the new album. It's great
Thank
to
you.
catch up with you. I, I
Thanks.
I typically wait until I talk to the musician before I put it on the show, but I've enjoyed it so much, it's already on the show, so I'm just gonna have to put it back on. So
Cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
thank you very much. Happy to hear it.
yeah. So a brand new state. Before we get into the album, we get into your life and music. I want to begin with, 5 years ago this pandemic began, and I know it happened differently in different areas. LA was hardcore, Florida was non, Kansas City was kind of in the middle as usual. So ultimately, how did you make it through that time period as a musician, and how did it either influence this album or the way that you roll now as a musician?
Oh, that's a great question. I was very fortunate during the pandemic, during COVID. I was teaching a lot online, and I mean that started in person. And I was actually in Pennsylvania at the time, and I was in my hometown of Erie. After a graduate degree, I finished at Cincinnati Conservatory. I was back in Erie for about a year, and I was teaching piano, guitar, violin, um, at a private after school music school, like its own private thing. It was like 30-minute lessons.
Yeah.
And so when COVID hit, they had that initial thing of like, oh, everyone's just going to take off work for 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
I remember
Oh, dude, yeah.
driving to work to have a meeting with all the other teachers at the school. And our boss, great boss, his name is Anthony Sardini, and it was Accurate Performance in Erie, Pennsylvania, was the school. He was going to have a meeting with everybody. And I remember driving there and just thinking, like, how, and it was nobody's fault at the time, really. It wasn't his fault or anything, but I'm like, how are we going to take 2 weeks off when there's a pandemic out there that we don't know what it is and we have no cure for it?
Yeah.
And so all of that teaching went online. So I was still working about 30 hours a week. And it was really cool because a lot of these kids, a lot of my students were ages like 9 to 16, and their parents really supported them continuing to do it. And I actually had students start to ask for 2 lessons a week because they were so bored,
Yeah.
and everyone was at home. So it was actually, in my situation, a really good time to continue teaching and really think about online teaching and sort of like how things are communicated when you can't perfectly physically demonstrate something or, adjust a student's hand in person. It actually helped me, I think, as a teacher to be able to more articulately state what I wanted them to do.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty busy actually. And then I started a second master's program at Penn State University about a year into the pandemic. So I kept all of my online students or most of my online students, and then I started at Penn State. Um, Part of the reason I did that, I really liked the bass teacher that was there, Josh Davis. He's a jazz player too and does some stuff in New York and LA from time to time. And um, I was a TA for the bass studio, the classical bass studio. So my all of my education has been on classical bass, in the formal academic setting. And I was also the TA for the jazz program. So I had a double teaching assistantship, and it was during COVID, so there weren't a lot of gigs, so it sort of just made sense. And I was running a big band there and doing this whole thing. So musically for me during COVID, a lot of the teaching actually just took a different form.
Yeah.
But in terms of the record, one of the themes of the record, or really the overarching theme, is how there's things in life that are outside of us that we interact that change us, and then sometimes there's changes within us that change how we interact with what's outside of us.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the big overall picture, and that's the idea behind the name A Brand New State, is that it's about states of being and ways of thinking and ways of interacting with the world is more of the idea and concept behind the music. And so I think COVID had something to do with it, maybe in a little more of an unconscious way, where it's like a little more of a reflective time. There's some fear involved there, but there's also a time of rejuvenating and really realizing what it means to connect with people
Yeah.
a little bit. And it changed our world. I don't know if you did, maybe you did, but all the Zoom meetings and things like that sort of altered how we see things,
Yeah.
in terms of like how we can connect with people. So there's sort of this weird juxtaposition, right? Of like, I can't be with you, but we're going to connect over Zoom.
Yeah.
And it's sort of interesting how some of that technology has stayed. Like where I work now, we have every other music department meeting on Zoom,
Yeah.
and so it's sort of we've integrated part of it,
it
you
it
know.
it's become like a noun and a verb, it's become like synonymous with what we do. Like even if you're in Microsoft Teams or you want to do Google Meets or you want to do it, it's all Zoom. That's what we're doing. It's wild. But it is
Right.
weird now that we're 5 years into this, away from it, I should say. We did think it was going to be 2 weeks because here in Kansas City, they were all going on spring break. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking there'll be an extra week and then we'll get back at it because it was unprecedented. But
And no one knew what was going to happen.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
and what I decided to do as a jazz journalist is I was like, all right, I'm going all in with interviews. Like I had teenagers at home. I'm like, I'm going to play interviews for them, which was one of the best, most therapeutic things I could have done. We would be in the car and they would listen to the interviews and all of these musicians were overwhelmingly positive. Like one from New York, moved to Costa Rica, so he became a surfer, and you could hear macaws in the background and the surf in the back. It was really cool just to see how the world responded that quickly to this
Yeah.
tumultuous event that took place. So,
I
uh,
always thought if I knew ahead of time it was going to be that long, I would have bought an RV,
yes,
just traveled and taught, because that's the thing. I was teaching on Zoom. I could have been anywhere.
yeah. It's that romantic travels with Charlie at notion of Steinbeck, hopping in, loading up, getting the animals, getting the family, and going. Yeah, and I've talked to other people that did that. They
Um,
immediately reacted and said, "We got our RV. We got in there, and we just went to park to park to park." But how are you going to know that? I mean, everything in hindsight, right? So
right.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. But so I'm curious at the end of the day. I know it's not the focal point of creating, but ultimately there's ears out there that are going to hear this. What are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
I want people to experience a way to interact with the concept of change that maybe seems less scary. I think the idea of change, not a lot of people are excited by it,
Right.
you know, and I think there's ways to see the world and there's ways to see problems and challenges that, it might sound cliche, but are just more like opportunities, and ways that life kind of deals us blows sometimes, and how we respond to that can help form our character and becomes part of our story. It really just becomes part of our life story. And the idea of reinvention, self-reinvention, I think is very important and is necessary, without necessarily discarding, where we've been or what we've done or who we've known, just that idea of having a more fresh perspective, and again, that was sort of the idea behind the title, A Brand New State, is just states of being and ways of viewing the world that we can develop, and that there's sort of a joy and wisdom, I think. That we can have a life that's, fulfilling, and that we interact with life and we don't shy away from it,
Yeah.
is I think, and just sort of that idea of knowing when to act and knowing when to not. And I think maybe that's a bit of a Taoist thing. Um, Knowing, as other people put it, know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Right.
You
That's
know,
right.
so
I
it's sort
I quoted Kenny the other day. There was something that came up and I did the same thing.
of,
Kenny's floating in the air, man.
yeah, it's
Uh,
in the zeitgeist, I guess. But I think there's truth to that, and I think there's a power in that. Um, I mean, I'm going to be turning 32 in May, which is next month now, as of today.
yeah. Yeah.
But I've experienced some loss. My father passed away when I was 22. My brother Andrew, who's a couple of years older than me, about 4 years after that, 3, 4 years after that, and
Oh,
recently my brother Danny. And so I feel like in my life in my 20s, when I turned 30, some people
Wow.
are like, oh my God, I'm 30. And I was like, thank God I'm 30. You know what I mean? I was like,
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff I can just, in my mind, sort of leave in that decade of my life, and I felt like 30 to me was like a fresh start in a
Totally.
way. Like there was a lot in my life that I didn't have control over and that I wasn't responsible for that really impacted me. And I guess the pandemic would be one of those things,
Yeah.
but there was those experiences of loss and change that I think were pretty formative and really rocked my world, and had to sort of like readjust after that, you know.
It's interesting because I think about people, I'm 52, and I think about how people in their trajectory react to death and how it can sink some people. I mean, it can literally be the moment, like with Buddy Holly, the music died, like everything changes. But for other people, you just find a way, like you say, you almost have to metamorphosize from that worm to a butterfly, and you have to do it a few times, maybe more in your life. And I'm curious, there's two things that are floating through my head. First of all, when you talk about change and people being adverse to it, when I was in high school, the career day, somebody came in one point and said, you're going to change careers between 7 to 10 times. And we were like, whoa, 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 what? We already kind of have an idea. That's a lot of change. But we went with it. But with regular life, people are just totally adverse to that, whether it's moving or, there's divorce, there's new relationships, there's all of these things. Like, it's just a part of life. Like, you don't want to stay. Like, when people used to say high school, your senior year is the best year of your life, I'm like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What a horrible setup for your existence. Because you want to flourish. You got a whole lifetime. That can't be the best year, you know.
Right.
But I'm curious, how much has music played a part in your therapy, your healing, your dealing with loss, and getting to this point in your life where you're a musician teaching others and making music, whereas it could have totally changed after those seminal moments in your existence.
I think I was really well set up to interact with music in a very healing way. And the first person that I really have to credit with that is my mom, because she was always, and my father too, but my mom especially, she was always really supportive of me, being in like my grade school band. It is something I wanted to do, and I think she recognized it. My mom's a very spiritual person, and I think she saw that it was just like necessary for me, in a way for me to live. It was like a very deep need that she was always, when I was a kid, she was playing Mozart or like Raffi. You know what I mean? It was like Baby Beluga or like Symphony 35.
Yeah.
So I kind of ran the gamut, and she was always really into like Kansas, Toto, and would always play the music, Cat Stevens, the music she liked when I was growing up. And I think her and I really connected on music in like a way I didn't realize at the time when I was a kid, and I just have great memories of driving around Erie, Pennsylvania with my mom playing the radio, just like simple. Like that
Yeah.
was literally it. I don't know where we were going, but that is the memory.
Yeah.
And so when I got into high school is where my family started experiencing more issues with my brother, who ended up having some problems with drugs and drug addiction. And the way I sort of began to deal with that was to just practice more because it was a productive thing to do that it felt like it was helping me understand my emotions, and so it was a way to sort of sublimate my emotional energy, I think at the time. And I remember for hours I would just go into my room, and I was playing bass guitar at the time. I hadn't yet picked up the double bass, and I would just go into my room and just play for hours and just kind of like lie in my bed and just come up with things and explore things. And I was listening to a lot of Thelonious Monk, and that was around the time I got into bebop and jazz in the idea of improvising. And I was like, wait, I can make this?
Yeah.
And so that was a pivotal point. I think it was the interaction of those two things, of those issues emerging in my family and in my daily life that I didn't have control over,
Yeah.
and this thing that I did have some agency over. right?
Yeah.
Was improvisation, was music, and I could create my own sonic world. And it was like, it felt like something that was mine,
Yeah.
despite all this going on. It was like, I have this thing that I love and that I can just explore. And so that was, I think, a very foundational point in my life in terms of seeing music that way. And I actually, in my undergraduate degree, I studied music therapy. And so I'm actually a board certified music therapist for a couple more years at least, as I have my certification. But that was my undergraduate work was in music therapy because I was super interested in how music was a psychological tool or how music related to our spirit and psychology. But there was always that idea of resiliency and tenacity. And there's this, you can't really see it, I'll take it off to show you, but there's this bracelet that my dad had
Yeah.
uh, that when he died, he wanted me to have. And he got this from a Navajo artist. His name was Melvin Gordo in Santa Fe.
Yeah.
And he viewed it, this bracelet to him represented that idea of resiliency, and sort of bouncing back. And he was a very positive person, and he would write every day these little sayings like never give up, be proud of who you are, never feel sorry for yourself as he was undergoing his cancer treatments.
Yeah.
And so for him, speaking your point that death and change can sort of sink some people, for him, he started writing poetry, um, became a creative person. He was an engineer his whole life. So he sort of took an artistic turn himself in his last couple years of life in response to his illness. But I think the important thing to know was that he practiced positivity, and it was almost a discipline for him. Like he would get up and write, and there were always darker moments when you're dealing with something like that, but you sort of have to like maintain what light there is, and sort of like
Yes.
nourish and develop that. And so I think for me, what that taught me is that it is a discipline. Like positivity is a bit of a practice, gratitude is a practice. And so for me, there's that element of discipline of like, yeah, like with grief and change, there are those darker moments. But part of what we can control is that attitude to an extent, and that we can practice positivity and gratitude and things.
So what was the first live show that you saw that blew you away? Live jazz show?
Oh my God, that's a crazy question because it totally relates to this record. Um, so it was Jeremy Pelt
Wow.
in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was on tour with Water and Earth, this record he came out with around that time. And that was the first like contemporary jazz I saw because Erie, there's some great musicians there. Most of the folks that played jazz in the time were older men. So there's like a certain book, there's a certain attitude, there's a certain like way of doing things, which I learned a lot from and I benefited from their mentorship. But that was the first time I saw a show that I was like, holy crap, like you can do this. And it sounds so silly now, but he had like a keyboard,
Yeah.
and there were like effects on the trumpet. And it was like, whoa, like there's this whole possibility out there. And it was unlike anything I heard because like in high school, I was in high school at the time. Um, we were playing like bebop tunes and songbook stuff, and it was like, you know, a little more conservative and towards the idea of that tradition, and um, clearly Jeremy Pelt is someone in and of that tradition, but is also like forward facing.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of was the ironically like one of the first times I was like, holy crap, like I thought jazz was cool, but it's like really cool.
Yeah. For sure. So what is it that gets you up every day? Why do you love this music? What motivates you to evolve and to grow into it and to teach people this? What is it for you?
I think it's good for my brain, it's good for my spirit. It's always like discovering new ways of seeing things, and it's that pursuit of that relatable thing, that new relatable thing that represents who you are in that moment. and to be true to that, I think there was that Mingus quote, like, I'm trying to play the truth of who I am. The problem is it's always changing.
Yeah.
It's like one of his something along the lines of what he said. And I think that's true, and as humans, we're always developing, and our music is social music, jazz is social music. And so it's meant to change,
Yeah.
and that's sort of the thing is it's like a way that when I practice, I feel like I'm trying to relate to myself. And I think through properly relating to yourself, it helps you relate to other people. So it isn't like a selfish thing. It's actually more about connection. But you kind of got to start with what you got
Yeah.
before you like
Yeah.
be like really deeply connect with other people.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it for me. Music was so good. It has been so good for me. And so I think that's a big part of what inspires my teaching, as opposed to seeing it as like, oh, you played the right note or the wrong note. I think it's a little more holistic than that, and
Yeah.
I think a little bit more about people's spirits and where they're at in their development and where they're at in their understanding. And I think sometimes a light bulb moment in music or a profound concert experience or can really tip you off to something great, and can be a process of discovery about life or about yourself. Sometimes it's just fun, you know what I mean? And so it's like there's like that dichotomy, right? Of like this can be super deep or this can be like, oh man, this is just I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with either. It's just it can take so many forms,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, Alex, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, students, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think wow, that's a good question.
That's a
I,
therapy hour.
yeah. Yeah, are you billing insurance for this or
That's
like
right.
like
Billable hours.
I still remember some of the codes, so I can, do
Yeah.
the insurance that way. Um, I think I'm a little bit of all of those things that people think that I am.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to. I think we're different people in different places and around different people and situations.
Yeah.
And so I think it's about balancing all of those things. I think it's about being authentic and genuine in how you show up in those roles and in those places and in those periods in your life, um, but being able to balance it out,
Yeah.
and to have a healthy balance. I think what I prioritize for myself, and I'm sorry if I'm not entirely answering this question, but I think what is important to be is to work to be healthy.
Yeah.
And to be nurturing of yourself and to be, to expect certain things of yourself.
Yeah.
There's that saying out there that's like expectations are premeditated resentments or something. And sometimes I think so, sometimes I think not. I think certain expectations can be okay.
Yeah.
It's like if I have a disagreement with a friend, I expect of myself to behave in a certain way that's kind and respectful and is try not to say anything mean. You know what I mean? To me,
Yeah.
that's an expectation.
Yeah.
And so I don't think they're all bad. I think it's part of being healthy to recognize expectations and to know when to mitigate them and to know when to be forgiving of yourself.
Yes. Yes, for sure. For sure.
I think it's about balance, and I think that's who I am, is how, uh, in part, how other people see me,
Yeah.
and I think that is what it comes down to is that balancing those different things.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If anyone wants to pick up a copy of the album that will benefit you the most, catch you live, any of the good business in your world, where's the best place to go?
So you can go to my website, alexmclaughlinbass.com, and I have the record right here. You can pick up a copy of this, A Brand New State.
Beautiful.
Uh, it's available on my online shop there. I'm also doing a record release party down in Los Angeles on Friday, May 2nd.
Okay.
May 2nd, and that's at Kulak's Woodshed. It's the spot in North Hollywood. Amy Rowe Trio, LA pianist, she's going to do an opening trio set at 8. My group's going to go on at 9. I got Andy Fraga Jr., who's a drummer down in the desert, good friend of mine. He's going to be playing. And I got Lawrence Hobgood. He's going to be playing piano for the show.
Right on.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty tight. You
Yeah.
know, Lawrence is out here in Southern California right now. He's heading back to New York at the beginning of June. And we sort of interacted a bit at the beginning of the year at a cigar bar down in Palm Springs. So we sort of met that way. But yeah, Friday, May 2nd, doors are at 7:45 p.m. Kulak's Woodshed. I'm going to be doing a discount on the vinyl for that show, so it'll be $15 in person
Okay.
for the vinyl and a $10 donation if you wish at the door. But I just want people to enjoy the music there. There's going to be a live stream for that show at Kulak's Woodshed, I believe on their Facebook page. So if you connect with them, that can be a way to kind of see what's going on, get hip to that. But yeah, my website, alexmclaughlinbass.com. I have an Instagram that I usually post links to purchase the vinyl. AMCLAU89 is my handle on Instagram, so should pop right up if you search Alex McLaughlin.
Okay. And I will put all these links in the show notes. Alex, great to catch up with you, man. Thank you for taking a minute out. Thanks for the music. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm glad you're enjoying the record, and nice conversation. I appreciate those questions. It was fun.
Absolutely.
Joe Domino here, host of KC's Neon Jazz Radio. On International Jazz Day, April 30th, join us at the Music Hall in downtown Kansas City for the event of the year, 90 Years of Count Basie Swing. At 7 p.m., the world-famous Count Basie Orchestra takes the stage. From 5 to 7 p.m., it's a VIP reception with jazz legends and honorees. Finally, from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., join the after-party jam session at Lonnie's Reno Club inside the Ambassador Hotel. Tickets are moving fast. Get yours now at kccreativecity.com/count-basie. This event is part of International Jazz Day, supported by the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, with Kansas City proudly standing as America's only creative city of music. I'll see you there, Kansas City.